Okay, morning. Can you see that okay with that eye? Okay. So this morning we're doing the humanistic approach and person-centered approaches to counseling. So last we covered Freud and we've covered behaviorism. Those who get the joke understand behaviorism. Those who don't need to go and reread behaviorism. Skinner, press lever to enter. Yeah, Skinner box, press the lever, you get fed. Pavlov and Bandura, social learning theory. Little fun. How we're doing on time. It's not part of it. This is a bloody advert. You're stuck with adverts these days. This is what you're supposed to be seeing. Yeah, so that in essence gives you an idea of humanistic approach to therapy and their standpoint. What does it sound like to you? What are you picking up from just that? Beautiful because you can see yourself in it. Yeah. We should all be able to see ourselves and the qualities that we would like to see in ourselves and in other people. And that's where the humanistic approach is really coming from. So what we're going to look at is, well, what is the humanistic approach? What are the core conditions for the client-therapist relationship? And looking at some of the strengths and weaknesses. Okay, with some of my slides, I'll put up a mind map of this is what covers the lecture. These are the different things we're going to look at. Now, mind maps are useful for those who learn visually rather than auditory, and they like to see diagrams and things. So in planning your essays, think about using mind maps. Okay? So you draw things out and you add in the different pieces that go with each element. So you begin to get a structure and an idea of how it all fits together. Mind mapping is a very powerful way of doing things if that's how you operate and that's how you learn. So, the background to humanistic, we're going to look at Rogers as the driving force, phenomenology and existentialism, third force psychology, and Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This is the background to the approach. We're going to deal with each of these in a bit of detail now. So Carl Rogers was the most important driving force, or one of the most important driving elements to the humanistic approach. And he is coming from a psychological point of view, but his background was that of a minister. He grew up in a very religious home. He went to seminary school to study to become a minister. So you can begin to see when you read his theory where that is influencing his approach. And when he was at college studying to become a minister, he did a psychology course and changed track. Decided not to be a minister but to become a psychologist instead. And he became a child psychologist. And he began to use clear research and observations using the scientific method. And again, he was also reacting to the psychoanalytic and behavioristic model. He was saying, no, there's more to human beings than either determined by our unconscious forces or controlled by reinforcement. There must be something more. And if you think of his religious background, where he's coming from, the concept of free will is at play here. Don't we have free will? Are we that determined? We must have more. So he began, and he looked at his particular study that got him going, was the effect on a client of directive versus non-directive. If I tell a client, like behaviorism and psychoanalytic sort of processes do or not, what's the outcome? So what do you think is directive and non-directive? Some idea. So you're trying to push for a certain outcome being directive, yeah? The counselor knows best, yes. They have the answer for the client. They can fix their problem. Telling them what to do. Like the doctor. What happens to most of you when you get told what to do? You do the opposite. You don't do it. Why is that? Even though we know it's good, we still don't follow. Don't smoke. It will kill you. How many of you smoke? Yeah. Yet we do it. Well, what is that about? And that's what he was coming up against. Clients know the answer. So what is non-directive? Client to take the lead, yeah? The client contains the answer within. Yeah. The client knows best. You all know what your solution is to your problem. Why you do or don't do that solution is a separate question. So, and this is around the field of phenomenology. Please don't get scared by big words. And existentialism. Yeah? This is a philosophical movement that's coming out post-World War II, is when the humanistic movement began to rear its head. It's the foundation of the World Health Organization, foundation of the United Nations beginning up, and people trying to make sense of the atrocities of World War II. Why did concentration camps happen? Why did good people commit genocide and murder in the level that they did? Why did good soldiers execute prisoners of war? Okay? Why did these things happen? And they began to think there has to be more. And it began looking at the worth of the individual and the centrality of human values. And the human capacity to overcome hardship and despair. Why did some people survive the concentration camps and others did not? That's where logotherapy comes from. I've gone blank on his name now. Viktor Frankl. Yeah. Viktor Frankl survived the concentration camps and he wrote a book about it. He wrote a book of why the existential question is important. The meaning of life. Why are we here? What is our purpose? And phenomenology, our experience of living. And what it comes to is the subjective experience of the person is central to their health. Not the objective experience, not the measurable element, but the subjective experience. You're all on a street corner and a motor car accident happens. You will each have a different experience of that motor car accident, depending on where you were standing, where you were looking, what you were doing at that moment, your history. So there's no truth anymore, is what begins to emerge. Truth becomes relative to the person's experience and context. And this was the third force in psychology known as humanism. They began to see people as human beings for what we are. We all have an experience, and that experience is valid. So here are some of the main players. Maslow and his hierarchy of needs is an important one. Allport and the psychology of the demobbed. What does that mean? What is the demobbed? Post-World War II, you had millions of conscripts in the army. You were told, you've got to go and fight in the war. Off you go, guys. Now they've got to come home. And that's what demobbing is about, is moving them from being an army soldier back to being a civilian. And the realization that the horrors of war leave an indelible mark, which today we know, and it's called post-traumatic stress disorder. We're aware that there needs to be a transition process of soldiers returning from war back to civilian life. You can't just discharge them. And that began looking at the humanism involved. And Fritz Perls and Gestalt psychology. We'll discuss a bit more about those. Mad Fritz Perls. He was quite insane. So the key element of the humanistic tradition is self-actualization. The concept and the idea that we are put on earth to self-actualize. And this is based on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Okay. So the needs are hierarchically organized, and we'll go through that in detail. There are different levels. The lower ones have to be satisfied first before the higher ones. And as the lower ones are satisfied, higher ones emerge, but the lower ones take precedence over the higher ones. If the lower ones begin to fall out of kilter or no longer being met, the higher ones fall away. Okay, so Maslow's. So you generally don't feel the higher one until the current level has been satisfied. So as we go through this, think about how your own needs have been met at each level and what level you're at the moment in his hierarchy. Okay? So write these down as you go along and think about where this fits. And we'll do this in detail. So this is an overview. Here you have a bottom line, your biological and physiological needs, your basic life needs, safety needs, belonging and love needs, esteem, and self-actualization. Okay, so we'll do each one of these in a little more detail now. So your physiological needs. Core, what you need to be safe. to live. Food, water, shelter, oxygen. Okay? Sex, important. We are sexual beings. Don't deny the fact. Okay? These are our basic needs that we need to have met. So if you're homeless and living on the street, this is where you're operating from. There's no use trying to do therapy with a homeless person when he hasn't got food to eat. Okay? You're not going to get anywhere. Because he's not interested in self-actualizing. He's interested in staying alive. Okay? Think of people in concentration camps. Think of those in the Ebola crisis. What is the crisis? What level is being addressed? Next level is feeling safe. Protection, stability, avoidance of pain, routine and order. The things you can relax when you feel safe. You know that when you close your door, you're not going to be broken into and robbed, pillaged and murdered at night. That you can walk safely down the street. That the people who you live with care about you. That you're not about to be kicked out onto the street by the landlord because he just feels like it. That there are laws and structures in place to protect you from exploitation. Then we can begin to engage in being a society. Our social needs. Being accepted. Feeling belonging. Being part of a team, place of work. We all need a feeling to belong. Man does not live in isolation. We are a social species. Okay? There are only few of us who choose to live in isolation. The majority of us, given the choice, we will always seek out company. If you think of Castaway, the movie, what does he go and do in the movie? Creates an imaginary friend from the basketball, he paints a face on it. Okay? We don't want to be alone. Even if we might say, leave me alone. Esteem needs are important. We need to begin feeling. So we're moving from the social to who we are as a person. How do we get our sense of self-esteem, respect, self-respect, respect from others, care and love? The sense that we matter. Where does that come from? Okay? These are important to feel that we are worthy. Because if we don't feel worthy or good enough, what happens? Depression, low self-esteem, low self-worth, suicidal behavior, psychosis even, acting out behaviors to try and get our esteem needs met, even if it's negative. And self-actualization, where we achieve our full potential, we meet what we feel we are capable of doing, we achieve, and we are fulfilling a hope, dream, desire. Hence, that's why you're all here. You are trying to self-actualize a dream, a hope, a belief about yourself. That I can get a degree or be a counselor, or help others, whatever that is. You're trying to self-actualize. And you will have self-actualized throughout your life at different stages. It's not a pinnacle point. It's a point you reach and you drop back down from, and a new goal will set you up for a new self-actualization. And it'll be in different areas of your life. So think of areas where you have self-actualized. Where you have gone, yes, I've done it. It's that fist in the air moment. Okay? So, our basic safety, belonging, esteem, and self-actualization is the basic tree that we're operating from. And this has been a very core concept in the humanistic movement, these ideas. but the concept of self-actualization being quite a central one. It's a bit dated now. I mean, this was Maslow's, I think it was the late 50s, early 60s that it first came out. Is this still valid? There might be more. I had a friend who didn't bother looking after these things because he chased this. He didn't bother eating. He was an artist. And doing the perfect picture was for him the more important thing. And he'd arrive at my place shaking because he had smoked too many Gilwas and drank too much black coffee. And pushing his arms, going, get rid of these ants, because he was high on turpentine from mixing of the chemical. So I'd feed him, give him a bed to sleep for a few days, and he'd go off and paint again. And obviously he didn't live very long. Died at the age of 40, but he was a happy artist. But he self-actualized. He achieved what he wanted to. So it raises the question, do we have to have these met in order to achieve these? Think of Buddha. He forsaken all of those to self-actualize. He sat under a tree in the mythology of Buddha. He was an ascetic. He gave up all pleasure, gave up eating, gave up the joys of life in order to self-actualize. And self-actualization is an individual process. Hence Buddha's famous quote, if you meet Buddha on the road, kill him. Because only you can self-actualize yourself. No one can self-actualize you except yourself. So if you think you have found the truth in something, you've found a lie. So that questions lots of religions. So the next one, who played a big influence, is Peirce, who brought Gestalt theory into play. And he believed that the whole was more important than looking at the parts. So the whole is stronger than the individual parts. And he was motivated to perfect a theory as different from Freud's as possible. Again, a reaction to psychoanalytic. Fritz Perls was trained as a psychoanalyst initially. And he reacted to this saying, no, we are not just this, we are more. We are greater than these bits and pieces. It's when the bits and pieces come together and the synergy of all the different pieces creates the important element. And his basic tendency is we work in the here and now, which is still very relevant. We develop personal awareness and take personal responsibility. Where his psychoanalytic element plays out is unfinished business. And the goal is to become more fully alive. Isn't that a wonderful goal? To be more fully alive. So when I went for my master's training and the professor said to us upon selection, he said, everybody here is capable of being on the course, but we can only take 10. We have to choose. Out of 80, we have to take 10. On the basis of what we choose is we are looking for the more colorful people. That was his selection criteria. So, here and now, everything important happens in the present. So he wasn't ever looking at the Freudian stuff. The Freudian stuff is in the present. So he became very focused on the client in the here and now and what's happening with them. And how the past is in the present. Okay? He's looking at the blocks that prevent themselves from having contact with themselves and from others. What prevents us having a fully powerful human connection? Hence he got rid of clothes in therapy. In the 60s he did group therapy in the nude. Large groups. To get rid of these barriers between us. They weren't sexual. They were about getting rid of the resistance. Okay? Clients aren't allowed to overgeneralize. You know, when one goes to the market, no, when I go to the market, you make the client own their statement. So, Fritz Perls had an important influence. He He began to shift this general humanistic into a therapeutic process. And along comes Rogers, who talks about the actualizing tendency, the sense of self, and the core conditions for therapy. We think we listen, but very rarely do we listen with real understanding, true empathy. Yet listening of this very special kind is one of the most potent forces for change that I know. Okay, so this is where Rogers is coming from. Very key element. A mind map of Rogers' ideas and concepts. So have a look at that in more detail later on.
Hi, I'm Gavin.
I'm Dan, and we're the Slow-Mo Guys.
Hello. Hello.
Carl Rogers was also a humanist. More than anyone else, Carl Rogers invented counseling. The vast numbers of counseling psychologists, marriage and family therapists, and other mental health professionals are the product of his humanistic approach to therapy. Like Freud, Rogers believed that actual experiences become symbolized. These symbolized experiences reflect all the characteristics of an actual experience, without all the detail. It's not so much what you experienced in the past as it is how you interpret or feel about it. In contrast to Freud's distant, impersonal psychoanalysis, Rogers created an atmosphere of connection, warmth, and acceptance. The emphasis turned from treating abnormal conditions to helping normal people with everyday problems. It went from impersonal medical terminology to less intimidating language. Patients became clients. Analysis became therapy or counseling. Rogers made counseling accessible, and he changed the emphasis from analyzing defense mechanisms to focusing on the client. Originally, Rogers called his approach non-directive therapy. The assumption was that clients were given no direction at all. They had complete control over their sessions. But of course, Rogers did give subtle direction, so later he changed the name to a more accurate description of client-centered therapy. Therapy should focus on the needs and the goals of the client, not a predetermined goal of the therapist. Consequently, a client-centered therapist is relatively weak, in the sense that they don't give advice or homework, but they guide the client towards self-discovery. Rogers stressed the importance of the client-therapist relationship. The therapist should actively develop a strong relationship with the client through active listening, clarification, and paraphrasing. This friendly attitude was in direct contrast to psychoanalysis, behaviorism, and most other approaches. For Rogers, setting a warm, friendly environment was key to counseling success. Relationship allows the client to open up, put down their defenses, and feel safe. In the safety of a confidential relationship, clients could, many for the first time, experience unconditional positive regard. Rogers differentiates between conditional positive regard and unconditional positive regard, total acceptance. In conditional positive regard, love is contingent on meeting a standard. I love you if, or often, if you love me, you would. When people make love contingent on doing something for them, meeting their needs, acting according to their standards, their love is not fully free. In unconditional positive regard, you are accepted for who you are, just the way you are. Like Maslow, Rogers assumed that people are basically good and mentally healthy. Although there are abnormalities, mental illness, criminality, etc., the natural tendency is toward growth and normalcy. The primary tendency is to maintain, enhance, and grow. Growth is not effortless, but is the most likely outcome. For Rogers, the key to understanding people is to understand the individual's phenomenological field, a sort of worldview. Each person has their own perception of reality. So reality must be interpreted on an individual basis. An event is not as important as an individual's interpretation of it. Emotions play a large role in Rogers' theory. The summary is, emotions facilitate behavior. That is, we act because we feel. If we want to change how we act, we have to experience how we feel. In therapy, clients are encouraged to get in touch with their feelings and to express them. For many Rogerians, therapy is not a success unless the client feels deeply enough to cry. In contrast to Freud's id, ego, and superego, Rogers is a self-theorist. He believes that self gradually emerges, particularly from interactions with our significant others. We learn to become ourselves by interacting with others. We learn to love by experiencing love. We learn to accept ourselves by being accepted by others.
Okay, so that's Rogers in a nutshell. So he is basing a lot of his work around the actualizing tendency, the idea that we are motivated and growing all the time. And that if we don't grow, you die. Psychically, at least. That we have a tendency to develop into more complex organizations of ourselves. We evolve continuously. Are you the same person you were a year ago? Will you be the same person in 3 years' time? This course is going to change you. It's going to change your thoughts. It's going to change your beliefs. It's going to change how you engage in the world. Okay? It's one of the costs of doing a course like this. You become more fully human because you'll begin to see things that you didn't see previously. And once seen, you can't unsee. Put it this way. Out of the 10 of us who started my master's course, 7 were in relationships. At the end of 3 years, only 2 were in relationships. Out of 10, 7 were in relationships. By the end of 3 years, only 2 were in their relationships still. Okay? This may cost you your relationship. Students on this course have divorced, have left partners and families because they grow and develop and change. And partners aren't growing and developing and changing with them. So they yes. In some cases they found a new one because they're not prepared to move and develop. And so the partner has to find something new. In one, she was abused by her partner who literally took her books and threw them out the window and didn't want her to study. Yeah, she had to go into a shelter to escape. So if that happens to any of you where your partner or your family gets in the way of your studies, you got to come and talk. Okay? So, the idea is to grow and develop people. But it's to grow and develop both spiritually and to realize our full potential. So there's a very spiritual component to Rogers' theory. And where he's coming from, it makes sense. I mean, he was training to be a minister. It's through self-exploration and integrating the various psychic forces, emotions, feelings, thoughts, beliefs, that we become whole. And it's how we integrate our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors determines whether we are healthy or unhealthy. And this comes down to his core idea on child rearing, slightly different from Freud somewhat, on conditional versus unconditional positive regard. What is that? So we have a level of development and growth, and the degree of incongruence between the ideal self and the real self determines the degree of neurosis, using Freudian terms. Okay? Are we worthy or are they conditional? Determines the degree between these two elements. So he's working, and you can see he trained as a psychoanalyst, Rogers. I mean, he's got a Freudian background, but he moved again away from it. But he's using some of the Freudian concepts. So the greater the split between how you see yourself and how you'd like yourself to be, the greater the degree of discomfort and the less likelihood to self-actualize. The more you see yourself and how you want to be, the more likely they'll come together and be self-actualized. So where does this incongruence between your ideal self and real self come from? Okay. Is how we are raised. Were you accepted for being who you were, or did you have to do something to be accepted? So how are we behaving? How did our parents train us to either love ourselves or not love ourselves? Were we good enough if we got a C, or did we have to get that A? What are we doing to our own kids when we tell them that they're not good enough? Do we still accept them for who they are as a person, as a human being? Okay? This is the idea of unconditional acceptance. How do you accept and work with a pedophile? Could you work with a pedophile? Could you accept them unconditionally? It'd be hard. A lot of us would be challenged to do that. I'd find it very difficult. Unconditional acceptance is not approval or disapproval of behavior. It's of being the human being who we are. That inside there is inherent good. And can you see and help the person fulfill that good? Which I think is a flaw in the theory. It's assumption that there is no evil. I think there's some very real evil out there, people. So, think about a time when you felt deeply understood and accepted by another person. What was that? What was it that that person did that made you feel totally accepted? Can you think of the time when that teacher or that youth worker or a uncle or sibling, parent, just made you feel that you were wonderful, you were great? What are some of those qualities? What was it that they did? Some suggestions? They accepted you? Yeah? What else? By listening? How did they listen? What was the difference in their listening? So they understood how you felt. What else? They were empathic. What else? How were they there? Non-judgmental. They were present. They weren't distracted. They weren't on their phone. They weren't talking about themselves. They were present. Yeah? So these are some of the core conditions that you're talking about that Rogers relies on. You've all experienced them at some point in your life. Because if you hadn't, you would be seriously mentally ill. If you have not received the love, care, and nurturance of another, you don't survive. You don't thrive. You don't grow. In psychoanalytic or psychodynamic terms, this is formulated in the attachment theories. Yeah? And Rogers is talking about it here in humanistic terms. It's the same idea. Attachment theory of Bowlby and his conditions of worth are parallel. They're different levels of the same subject for me. So there's congruence. There's a genuineness on the part of the person listening. Okay? There was unconditional positive regard. There was acceptance and caring, but not necessarily approval of the behavior. And there was accurate, empathic understanding. They truly knew how you felt. Not how they would have felt in the situation, but how you felt in the situation. Okay? And the important element of that is they were able to communicate it back. Empathy is a two-step process. Understanding what the client is saying from their point of view and their experience, and translating that back to them. So these are the core conditions to feeling loved, cared, and nurtured. Within the therapeutic relationship, those conditions are at play. So if you think we are all here to self-actualize, the client is stuck in their process of being able to self-actualize. Hence, they are the best expert on themselves. They know themselves best. They know the intricacies of their lives and their relationships and their family. We don't. All we've got is a snapshot in time of what the client tells us. They cannot tell us everything. Otherwise, we'd have to live their life to fully understand them. And we can't do that. We are merely a passenger with them for a short period of time on their journey through life. We have got the privilege of being shared in that process. That they are sharing that journey with us. And that needs to be honored as a sharing. It is the client who knows what hurts, what directions to go, what problems are crucial, what experiences have been deeply buried. And we cannot determine that at all. So, whilst we generally talk of 3, there are 6 conditions actually. 1, 2 people are in psychological contact. You can't do therapy with somebody who is intoxicated, psychotic, or asleep. You have to have a psychological connection. 1 is experiencing incongruency. They're vulnerable, anxious, scared, upset. They're out of sorts. That's the client normally, hopefully not the therapist. The second is congruent and integrated into the relationship. They are present, whole, and stable, like a parent in a sense. The therapist experiences unconditional positive regard or real caring for the client. That doesn't mean you can sleep with your client. And they frame the therapeutic experiences of empathy to the client's frame of reference and communicate this back. The client perceives to a minimal degree this unconditional positive regard and imperfect understanding by the therapist. And that's what brings about change. Okay? So these are the 6 conditions. We generally tend to talk of only the 3 conditions, these 3, but there are 6. So just be aware of the 6. So what is the therapeutic process? You do not attempt to solve the problem. You trust the actualizing tendency of the client, and through the trusting relationship, you motivate the person towards health. Is that possible? It's collaborative. We're on a therapeutic journey together, and the therapist communicates empathy, checks understanding with the client, and discloses non-judgmental attitude. So surely just going to speak to your best friend is good enough. Isn't that the same thing? How is it different? Friend will give you advice, yeah? What? No, friends can be judgmental, throw it back at you. No, friends are not neutral. They're not outside of it. They have a degree of understanding of your context and what's going on for you and think they know best. Friends are always good with advice. Okay, we're out of time to watch this, so have a look at that one of person-centered therapy in action. So, what are some of the strengths? The most important element is the therapeutic relationship itself has been addressed. Up until now, it was not truly understood, even in Freudian terms. They used the therapeutic relationship, but they looked at it in terms of transference and countertransference. Rogers looked at the healing aspect of the therapeutic relationship, of the true encounter with another human being in that empathic, attached, caring manner. And that is why clients will fall in love with you. They become attached, and it's a normal and healthy process. The relationship is a curative factor in and of itself. That is open to question. Is it really? Diagnostic categories become a description of dis-ease, not disease. What is the uneasiness of the client that causes their anxiety, psychosis, depression? What are they uneasy about themselves? What is the fit between the ideal self and self-image not fitting? How have they not been actualized and accepted? The introduction of the concept of client rather than patient. Why is that important? By calling somebody a client versus patient, what changes? More. So patient, doctor. What's okay? So you're moving from medicalization, yeah. Power struggle, yeah. Expert to equals. You're not seen as ill. Good. Okay, and those are important shifts. Language determines reality, people. And we have Rogers to thank for us having counseling. Because until Rogers came along, counseling did not exist. You had to be a trained doctor and then train as a psychoanalyst in order to do therapy. That was the original Freudian model. It changed when he came to London and his daughter trained and other people began training under him who weren't medical doctors, and it was realized, okay, non-medical people can be trained as psychoanalysts, but there was a training process required, i.e. 7 years of your own therapy first, then 7 years of training. Okay, on average it took 10 years to train a psychoanalyst. And that model's fallen away. Because Rogers came along, and in the States it was illegal to call yourself a therapist unless you had been psychoanalytically trained and was a medical doctor. So he invented the term counselor. Got around that. And as a result spread worldwide. So what are some of the weaknesses? Overly focused on the therapeutic relationship and doesn't look at other factors causing distress. Separates and isolates the individual from society. Can you heal yourself? Is the relationship enough, or is there something more needed? The assumption that disturbances are a result of individuals' personal history rather than their social context. So it ignores social, political forces at play. Sexism, poverty, racism, disability. Okay? Known as the pitfall of reducing the political to the personal. You are your own fault. Look at the welfare minister saying disabled people don't deserve an equal wage. And the other important thing is there's no technique here. This is dependent on your characteristics and capacity to fulfill the core conditions. You either have them or you don't. You either develop them or you don't. You either have the capacity to develop empathy and do it in a depth-feeling manner, or you don't. There's no technique here. It's reliant on you as a person who is warm, caring, accepting, and loving of your clients. Big pitfall. It means only certain people can do this. New developments have evolved following on, and these are the latest developments in the humanistic field, And the strongest one is what's known as positive psychology, brought by Martin Seligman. Very powerful, very interesting stuff. And what they're looking at is the good stuff in life. Rather than focusing on pathology, which is where everything else has been looked, anxiety, depression, all these sorts of things. You actually look, well, let's look at some healthy people and why they stay healthy. What can we learn from health to inform us about ill health? Okay? It's a scientific understanding to bring interventions to build individuals, families, and communities. So it's quite global in his approach. Seek to nurture and develop to make life more fulfilling. Again, self-actualization concept at play. So the three areas is the pleasant life, life enjoyment. How do people fulfill their healthy living? The good life, life of engagement. Again, that's the relationships. And the meaningful life, or life of affiliation. That's the existential part. What gives your life meaning? Okay, so these are three important elements moving forward to think about. This is his website, Positive Psychology at Penn University, where he works from. He's had a very powerful and very important influence on psychology and counseling. So there's a lot of readings. I have put a number of readings up already, well, quite a few. We did a little overboard. Some are repeats of around the same topic, so have a look at the readings as you need. Okay. Sorry about the delay in getting the other readings up. I was off sick from last week, Thursday, until today. Hey, make sure you filled in the register.